All right, to write integration tests for Express applications, we need to install a library called Supertest. With Supertest, we can send HTTP requests to our endpoint just like how we manually test our application using Postman. So let's do npm install Supertest. And because this is only for testing, we're going to save this as a development dependency. So the version I'm using is version 3.0.0. Now back in the code, let's go to index.js. So on line 12, when we call the listen method, look, this method returns a server object. We should export this server from this module so we can load this server in our test file. So we get the result, call it server, and at the end, do a module.exports of this server object. Okay, now let's create our first integration test. So in our test folder, I'm going to add a new folder called integration. Here we add a test file called genres.test.js. So we want to write all the integration tests for the genres endpoint in this file. So we start with a describe block. Let's call this test suite /API/genres. Now inside this test suite, we're going to have other test suites. We're going to group all the tests for sending get, post, put, and delete requests in different test suites. So we add another suite that is for getting all genres. Okay. Now in this test suite, we're going to have one test. It should return all genres. Okay. Now we need to load our server. So on the top, we have to go a few levels up. So .. Now we're in the test folder one more time. Now we're in the root so we can load the index module. And with this, we get the server object. Now there's a problem with loading the server like this. The first time we run this integration test, this server will listen on port 3000. Now if we make a change to our code, Jest is going to rerun our tests. And because we're going to load this server again, we're going to get an exception because there's already a server running on port 3000. So when writing integration tests, we should load the server before and close it after each test. So in Jasmine and Jest, we have another utility function called before each. Just like the other utility functions, this function takes a callback. So Jest will call this function before each test inside of this test suite. Okay, now here we can load the server. So I'm going to get the initialization of this server and move it here. Now similarly, we have another utility function after each. Again, we pass a callback function. And here we can call server.close to shut down the server. All right, now that we have a server, we are ready to call this endpoint. So on the top, we need to load Supertest. So require Supertest. This module returns a function that we call request. And with this, we can send a request to an endpoint. So here in our test function, we call request. As an argument, we pass our server object. And then depending on the type of the request we want to send, we call get or post or put or delete. We're going to send a get request to this endpoint /API/genres. Now this returns a promise. So when we await it, we get a response object. Okay. Now because we have used await here, we need to mark our test function as async. Now finally, we can make a simple assertion like this. Expect response status to be 200. So now let's run this test. Back in the terminal, npm test. All right, all our tests are passing, beautiful. So it's successfully sent an HTTP GET request to our genres endpoint. However, this test is a little bit too generic. With this test, we can't verify if we're actually getting the list of genres. So in the next lecture, we're going to pre-populate our test database and then modify this test to ensure the genres that we get from this endpoint are the genres that we have stored in the database.